Hello and welcome to another video tutorial for the Pirate MIDI BRIDGE6 and BRIDGE4 MIDI controllers. Today we're going to be talking about the foot switch modes. There's a lot you can do with a Bridge MIDI controller. By default, the switch modes are all set to toggle on and toggle off. So when you press a switch, it will toggle on and send a particular set of messages, and when you toggle it off, you can set any number of messages to be sent when you toggle it off. But what if you want to do more than that? There's only 6 switches on a BRIDGE6. With BRIDGE4, you're even more limited, particularly with space. So maybe you could plug in an external auxiliary switch, or maybe you can't. Maybe there's just not space. So here's where the switch modes come in really handy. There's also a secondary mode available on every switch. So if I press and hold, then there's another set of MIDI messages that are sent there, another set that are sent there, etc., etc. Now, if we go into our menu and look at the switch configurations, we go into switches, go switch 1, config, you'll see all the settings here. As I said, the primary mode by default is on toggle. If we go over here to the second page, the secondary mode is on hold toggle. So as I showed you over here, if I hold a switch, it toggles off. If I hold a switch again, it toggles on. That's what that means. Let's go over to the primary mode and I'll talk you through all the primary modes. There's momentary mode. Momentary just sends press release messages, not the toggle on and toggle off message stacks. So when you press it, the light will light up momentarily and it will send the press message stack. As soon as you release that switch, the light will turn off and the release message stack will be sent. Then there's the tap tempo mode. This completely takes over the switch. It's not quite like other modes. This can be assigned to either MIDI clock A or B. You can have both MIDI clocks assigned to 2 different switches at the same time. And the LED primary will flash, which I will show you here. Save this. The LED primary will flash the tempo, and the switch label will show the current tempo. So if I speed this up, we got 216 and also flashing at that tempo rate. Now if I press and hold the switch, the secondary switch actually will send a start clock message over MIDI, and if I hold that and stop it again, that will send a stop message. And if I happen to be using one of the FlexiPort modes that sends analog or pulse clock out of the FlexiPort, then the secondary hold will actually stop and start those analog clock messages. So that's really handy as well. Now, let's go back in the menu and to the switch config, and the next mode is sequential. Sequential allows you to send a sequence of different MIDI messages. You can have up to 16 sequential steps, which could each have 1 MIDI message assigned to them. Each sequential step allows you to have a different switch name and a different switch color. Now these settings here for the direction allow you to choose this switch to go through that stack in reverse or forwards, or pendulum, which goes from the start to the end and then will reverse back through each of those steps. The send command, which here we have for always or secondary or primary, means that the sequential message can actually be delayed, so you can search for a step and then send it using the secondary function, which in this switch is, well, on this switch over here, is a hold. So the sequential message wouldn't actually be sent until you do that secondary action. So you can use it as a looper command type thing where you press the switch and it immediately starts the command for looping, or you could use it as something else, maybe preset selection, where you're just going through 3 different presets on one of your pedals maybe, and you can scroll through 1, 2, or 3, and then when you're ready to activate it, you can press and hold. So that's really great. Repeat setting actually goes through and either cycles through all the steps, or here it says last 2, where it'll go through all the steps and then it'll just keep repeating the last 2 steps until you reset it, or last 3. So that's really helpful, particularly for live looping. The other switch mode we have is sequential linked, which means you can put another switch on sequential mode, but it will actually be controlling the same sequential stack. So you can see over here we have the linked foot switch. So if I already have a sequential mode on foot switch 4, and I set this foot switch 4, then this sequential foot switch will be able to say if I have the direction as reverse on this one and forwards on this one, then I have just two different switches. One is increasing the steps, one is decreasing the steps. Then we have scrolling mode. Scrolling mode is great for scrolling preset numbers. It's great for scrolling CC values, scrolling notes. This is what you do. It's got very similar direction and sending options as the sequential mode. You have a minimum and maximum value, so similar to the sequential steps or the expression messages, where you might actually want to be going through a limited number of steps and cycling through them rather than the full 128 steps of a normal CC message. You can set limits, so maybe 0 to 10, and every time you press that switch you might want to increment that by 1, or increment it by 2, or increment it by 3, but the maximum increment is 32. And then you can also change the LED color of that as well. And very similarly to the sequential mode, you also have a scrolling linked. So you can have two switches, one that might scroll up, one that might scroll back, one that might send every time you press it, like the increment, but maybe you might want to occasionally decrement, and you will set that to maybe send on the secondary so that you are certain which one you're going back to. That's all the primary switch modes, so let's move to the secondary switch modes. By default, I said we're on hold toggle, so that will send the secondary toggle on and secondary toggle off message stacks. That will send them when you hold down the switch, like so. Then you have double tap momentary, so that means when you double tap, it will send the double tap message stack, but the light will only be momentary. I won't be sending the toggle on and toggle off secondary message stacks. It will be sending the double tap message stack. You have hold momentary, which will send the hold message stack, but it doesn't send the toggle on and toggle off stacks. And then you have double tap toggle, which toggles on and off those secondary toggle on, toggle off message stacks, but only when you double tap. So it's very similar to the hold toggle, except you have to double tap. So I'll show you what that looks like here. So I've set on the Bridge 4 here, I've set switch 1 to double tap toggle. So if I double tap, that will send the secondary toggle on message. If I double tap again, that will send the secondary toggle off message. Whereas if I had it in double tap momentary, it would momentarily light up the secondary LED and it would send the double tap message stack. The other important thing that interacts with the switch modes are the LFOs. There will be a full video on how they work later on, but for now, let me just show you that if you go into switches, switch 1, and go to LFO, you'll see here that you can enable the LFO, sync it to a particular MIDI clock at a particular frequency, and you can trigger a particular set of MIDI messages, and you can see that LFO oscillate the MIDI values of whatever messages are in that stack, and you can control the limits of how much it will oscillate that message. Some of these settings aren't working right now, but we have a huge update incoming for the LFOs, and we'll do a full LFO video when we've given you those updates. So let me show you where you can assign messages to each of these message stacks. Let's go into the menu, go to the switches, choose our switch, and then go to messages. Toggle on and toggle off message stacks are sent when you toggle on and toggle off in primary toggle mode. The press message is sent anytime the switch is pressed. So that's important to note, that if you use this, it will be sent every time you press the switch, no matter what intent you have, because the bridge will be acting quickly in case that message is time sensitive, like for a looper, and it won't be listening. The message stack for press won't be taking into consideration whether you're going to make a double press or something like that. It just wants to get that message sent. Release is similar. It will send a message whenever you release the switch. Double press, as I said, hold release, and here's the secondary toggle on and secondary toggle off message stacks. So if you want to toggle things on the secondary side, you need to add those messages to these message stacks. Then there's sequential, which is where you add your sequential messages, and scrolling, where you add a message that you want to scroll through. When you add a scrolling message, the value that you enter for that message, that is the value that the scrolling will start from. Sequential messages are more flexible and have lots of options, so we'll do a separate video to show you how to use those. But that's it for now. See you next time.